Mr. President, I'm here today to urge our colleagues to support the Water Resources and Development Act. Missouri has more than 1,000 miles of navigable waterways that transport over $4 billion worth of cargo every year. I will say, Mr. President, for you and I, it's hard at this moment not to stop and talk about what the EPA thinks navigable waters should be. But what navigable waters have always been thought to be in federal law, my state has 1,000 miles of those waterways. As I just said, $4 billion a year. There's no reason, with world food demand anticipated to double between now and 35 or 40 years from now, with people wanting to bring some manufacturing jobs and hopefully lots of manufacturing jobs back to this country, that $4 billion number won't be much bigger than that over the next few years. And this bill really matters. Maintaining and improving our waterways and the infrastructure that surrounds our waterways is critically important. The Mississippi River Valley is the biggest piece of contiguous agricultural ground in the world. One of the great benefits of the interior port system is that it's a port system that uniquely supports some of the most productive agricultural land anywhere in the world, but also a natural network that allowed our country to compete in the way it did early and the way it can now. But it's important that we maintain that system. We also need to think, if you have the blessings of the waterways, you also have the challenges of the waterways, protecting families in Missouri, families in other places from natural disasters. In our state, we had a surprise flood in December. It's not the only time we ever had a New Year's Eve flood, but it's not one you anticipate. Very big, very destructive, very localized, but managing that is a critically important part of what happens in the Water Resources and Development Act. A step here to prioritize these resources so that once again we're thinking about why we have flood protection, navigation, water projects. Specifically in our state, this bill authorizes a number of projects in the Kansas City area. The Kansas City levees themselves started in the 1940s while Harry Truman was using the desk that I stand behind right now, or an office I get to use in the Russell Building, maybe while he was president and vice president. But these were projects that took about 40 years to build and now need to be actively maintained. The Kansas City levees, the Turkey Creek Basin, the Swope Park Industrial Area, the Blue River Basin. These are flood control projects that protect lots of jobs and protect lots of families, and in some cases ensure that the waterway can be used for navigation and still have the proper emphasis we want to have on conservation and wildlife. The bill funds drinking water and clean water programs that are really much needed. The infrastructure that we have in this country below ground is even more challenged in so many cases than the infrastructure we have above ground, not just using the waterways for the drinking water that's provided to many communities from the rivers. Missouri River is a drinking water source for people who live in the Missouri State Capitol. It's the drinking water source for people up and down the river in many communities. This focuses not only on that traditional system, but also provides some additional assistance for challenged communities, for communities that need to replace lead pipes, for communities that can work through this bill for better ways to solve the important infrastructure problems they have. It authorizes $25 million for the dredgings of small ports on the Mississippi River system. In the last Congress, the senator from Iowa, Senator Harkin, and Senator Harkin's retired, but others, Senator Klobuchar stepped up to co-chair with me the Mississippi River Caucus that looks at the river as the asset it is. And as we try to take traffic off the highway system and off the rail system and put it on the water, if it's going to be on the water, sooner rather than later, all these ports matter. And so what this bill does is take a further step in encouraging looking at the small ports, the interior ports, the almost totally export ports. There's nothing wrong with buying things from other people, Mr. President, but it's actually economically a lot of has the tremendous positive advantage of selling things to other people, and that's what the interior port system is all about. Not only is it an export port system, but it basically serves twice the land mass of a coastal port. If you're on the Mississippi River, if a coastal port effectively serves 250 or 300 miles inland, a Mississippi River port would serve that same amount in all directions, 300 miles each way. Looking at those ports not for specifically the individual tonnage that might go out of a port, but how they fit into a whole system is very important. In many ways, the Corps, on many instances, says, well, they don't export 1 million tons, so we don't want to dredge that port because it's only a 900,000 ton port. I think we need to look at this in different ways. This bill creates the opportunity to do that. There's another measure that affects very close to where I live in Springfield, Missouri, Table Rock Lake, not on the lake, several miles from the lake, but owners there are worried that the Corps is not listening as it comes up with a shoreline management plan. If you don't live on the shore or affected by the economy of the lake, it may not matter much, but it matters a lot. If you're in one of those two categories, these plans don't come along very often. And so this measure addresses the concerns that property owners have that just simply, they're not being listened to. The public and those directly affected by changes in the plan, things like awarding bulk dock permits, shoreline zoning, need to have a say in what that plan will look like for a long time, because once these plans are in place, the Corps always has many reasons not to look at the shoreline management plan. The extra time here creates a comment period that lets the affected people be heard. I will say on this topic, when you talk to the Corps about variations in the plan, there are always 1,000 reasons they can't make one. Their view is this is a plan that took a lot of time to put in place. This bill says, okay, we would agree with that. Let's take the necessary time to put it in place. I'm also glad to see that this measure ensures that a community affordability study that I drafted some language on that we put in the appropriations bill, the Interior Appropriations Bill last year, would be put to use by the EPA. Now, what is a community affordability study? If you have water issues in your community, if the drinking water system has a problem, if the storm water system has a problem, if you have issues that involve water in your community, there are often reasonable caps that say, okay, if the federal government comes in and tells you you have to do something, they have to give you enough time that the community could afford it. Maybe that cap is no more than 4%, or some percentage a year would be the cap on raising your water bill year after year. If you raise it 4% a year, it doesn't take long before it's 40% higher than it was, and then 50% higher than it was. That's a cap that somebody looked at, studied it, thought this is, even though communities never like to do this, that this cap may be something communities could live with. But what if you have 2 or 3 of those instances that occur at the same time? So what this bill does is further encourage the EPA to do something that the Municipal League is really for, that my hometown, Springfield, Missouri, has been a significant encourager, proponent, drafter of, that would say you have to look at the total impact on ratepayers before you tell a community that they have to do something. You can put people in unbelievable economic stress by just deciding whatever the federal government wants to do is what the federal government gets to do, no matter what impact it has on that community. That integrated permitting will give communities what they need to really make the changes that they need to make in a way that the community can live with and deal with, and more importantly, families in the community can live with. This has some bipartisan compromise language that I've long supported also to encourage the safe disposal of coal ash. I've heard from rural electric utilities that the rules handed down by EPA are too harsh. The language will help address the concerns in a bipartisan way. I really urge my colleagues to support this measure. Grateful for the leadership we've seen both from Senator Inhofe, the chairman, and the ranking member, Senator Boxer, who served previously as the chairman of this committee. They've come together with a bipartisan package that makes sense, that impacts the lives of families, that has impact on our economy, and allows these projects to have a future they otherwise wouldn't have, and new rules to be put in place that wouldn't be put in place. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.